Ballet Bird is a streaming site designed by former Pacific Northwest Ballet principal dancer Julie Tobiasen. Ballet Bird offers ballet classes for anyone at any level of training that you can do from the comfort of your home or studio. After many years performing as a professional ballerina and decades of teaching at all levels of ballet, Julie is excited to offer her training for more people like you. Classes are designed for large and small spaces and for all levels. The low monthly membership fee is less than one in-person class and is accessible 24/7 with new classes added every month. Ballet Bird is a great addition to your regular in-studio training as well. Take advantage of the 10-day free trial and use the discount code COD25 to get 25% off through June 30th, 2023 at balletbird.com. Whether you are just starting your ballet journey today or you're a seasoned professional, Ballet Bird is the place for you. Visit balletbird.com or click the link in the show notes.
I'm Rebecca King-Ferraro.
And I'm Michael Sean Breeden, and you're listening to Conversations on Dance. This week on Conversations on Dance, we are joined by author Alice Robb, whose memoir Don't Think Dear chronicles her experiences as a young ballet student. We talk about the creative process for the book, her decision to include far-reaching studies on pain tolerance, dancer psychology, and other subjects to give context to a dancer's life and experience, and the book's place in recent high-profile conversations that have arisen about whether or how problematic ballet's past and present really are. Good morning. Thank you so much for joining us, Alice. Your book is making waves in the ballet world. It was particularly interesting for me because we were at SAB during the same years. So I just want to go back to the beginning of the genesis of this book. What did you start writing? Kind of just like experiences, or did you hash out a concept and then go from there? What were the early moments of your book?
Oh my gosh. Well, thank you so much for having me on. Also, very happy to be talking to you guys. So I would say the genesis of this book, it was very much a slow burn. I would say it started in my journal, as many of my ideas do. So I think long before I ever thought I might write a book about ballet, I was just kind of, I'm a big morning pages journaler girl. And yeah, I mean, I was doing some freelance journalism in the years before this book, and I think ballet would come up from time to time. I wrote a profile of Alexandra Antonelli in 2016. So that was a few years before I had started thinking about this book. But I think that kind of brought me back into the world of ballet and writing about ballet a little bit. But I think it was something that was always kind of percolating. And, I stopped dancing when I was 15. But I never really, there were years, I mean, we can get into it, but there were years when I was certainly not consciously following the dance world. I was not going to the ballet. I was not in touch with my ballet friends. But I think it was always something that was kind of simmering in the background. And then, as for this actual book, at first, when I started, thinking about, okay, I do want to spend a few years delving back into this world, I thought it was going to be much more academic. So the original pitch for this book was I thought I was going to do just a sort of traditional group biography of, 4 women dancers in history. But then just as I was working on it, kind of kept triggering memories, and I was writing more personally. And then I think as I started to explore my personal story a bit more, I got back in touch with my old SAB friends, and finally the kind of final click was realizing that I wanted to be about more than me. I wanted to include my classmates' stories as well.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
One of the things that you talk about, and Michael and I were talking about this specific part of your book, was the loss of identity. After you stop dancing, there's these phases that you go through of accepting the loss, and kind of like you're saying, there's a period of time where you just step away from the ballet world because it's too painful, and then you kind of come back to it. So I wonder if this is kind of part of that healing process. I don't know if you want to maybe say that, but kind of a way for you to go back, look at your experience with ballet and kind of digest it?
Oh my gosh, so much. I mean, I think writing this book was so therapeutic for me in ways that I didn't even know I needed. Because I think my first impulse was just avoidance of ballet. I think I was not really grappling with the ways that I was still being impacted by it. And then I think really the most, I mean, to use the term healing part of the research and writing process was reconnecting with my SAB classmates and kind of realizing how many shared experiences we had gone through, even, without being in touch. And it was very like validating, and just having other people to process this very specific experience with was really interesting. And I've heard from, a lot of readers who seem to have had similar experiences. So that's also been very nice.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I related to a lot of it. I loved some of the things that, like, I guess seemingly silly thoughts that we have, like when you sat down to watch the performance and you were too full, to perform. You're watching the performance, like that kind of thing. I mean, or just thinking of like, you want to like, you have this idea of what you want your body to be like, and you want to stay long. You're scared of bulking up. Like I remember I started going to the gym for the first time and like lifting weights, and then I was teaching. And I was like, oh no, my arm is too big now. It doesn't look like my shoulder is too close to my head. It doesn't make the right line to show my kids. Like that kind of stuff that stays with us, even though we're no longer like, that we could shed that, but it's like part of the process of moving on, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I only started, I think like for years, like it's so ridiculous because like I literally, as I said, like I stopped dancing at 15, but I was in my like late 20s the first time I was afraid of like touching a weight. I was like and then I finally went to some HIIT class or something, and I was like, oh, this is great, like I feel really strong now. But it just was like so ingrained.
I do the same thing with like running or something. I'm like, oh, I can't run. It's going to be so bad on my joints. Or, or like, even, I don't know if you guys like sometimes when I wake up with like my neck's out or something, I'll be like, oh my gosh, like right into that panic of like, how am I going to rehearse today or perform? And it's like, matter. Like all you have to do is just like sit at a computer today. Like you'll be fine. It's so funny how those things really just stick with us. So I wonder, it's one thing that's been brought up a lot in terms of your book is that people have been mentioning that it's refreshing to have someone talk about ballet that didn't have a career in ballet and stopped early, and they're just like a different perspective. Yeah. So how do you feel that does in fact give you a unique perspective in this conversation?
Yeah, well, I think it's a perspective that's not heard from often, but I actually think it's an incredibly common perspective. And I remember, because I mean, of course, so many kids start ballet, fall in love with ballet, dedicate a lot of our childhoods and our mental energy in our bodies to pursuing it, but of course don't have careers. And I mean, I remember as a kid going to summer programs and kind of looking around, and just I think that was kind of the realizing there are all these kids all over the country who, of with varying levels of, training and, different skills, who are just, most of us are not going to make it. And we're all trying so hard. Yeah. So I think that it's not a perspective I think this was a big part of why I wanted to write this book, was that I think most of the memoirs out there are by dancers who have been, had celebrated careers. And, I love those memoirs. Obviously, I read many of them in writing this book. But I think it's also, like some of these issues that we've already been talking about, like the identity things. I think people are sometimes surprised that like someone like me, who again stopped as a teenager, could still have been so impacted by ballet. And I think when I first started thinking about this book, because there haven't been many books like this, I wondered if that was actually like a weird personal quirk that I had just never been able to just get over this. And it was really through talking to other people and old classmates and stuff that I realized that yeah, I mean, we were doing this during a really formative time in our lives, and we're all still kind of living with the, the positive and negative effects of growing up in the
Right.
ballet world.
Right. I mean, I think your perspective, I mean, I don't know of any book like that. And I think it's even, there are still very few books even written by people that did have careers, but were not major careers.
Mm-hmm.
Tony Bentley, I remember reading Winter Season and
Yeah.
just being so shook by it because it was a completely different perspective than what we were
Yeah.
used to. So I think it definitely, like, it certainly adds something to this conversation because, as much as we love those books, it is a different thing. But, I think even your book is you have the ability, you kind of have, of course, you're talking about your personal experiences, but then
Mm-hmm.
there are a lot of moments where you zoom out. Like, I really enjoy how you take problematic or the patriarchal components of ballet, but then you
Mm-hmm.
you put it in the larger framework of just kind of what women in the world experience. How did you kind of decide that would be something you would tackle, like that sort of juxtaposition?
Yeah, I mean, I would say a lot of, as far as like making these decisions, a lot of them just kind of, emerged
Hmm.
organically. Like I didn't really set out with a thesis, but yeah, I mean, as I was thinking about the things that I had taken from ballet, I mean, it just became, of course, I've lived half of my life outside of the ballet world. So I feel very, you know, um, able to speak to like just the culture of just kind of, being a woman in the non-dancing world. And yeah, I mean, it's certainly not, it became clear to me that it's not that ballet has like invented, the patriarchy. It's just maybe a bit like more extreme in certain instances. But
Hmm.
like I quit ballet and it's not like I then walked off into the sunset into a world where no one ever looked at each other's bodies and it didn't matter what you looked like. It was
Right.
less
Right.
extreme. But all those things were still there.
Yeah.
Right.
How do you think that when we're talking about that aspect, the patriarchy, how do you feel like
Mm-hmm.
women running companies or stepping into positions of power, choreographers can shift that?
Well, I mean, I think even just their existence, their presence is so huge, and just, them kind of being there as potential role models. I mean, I don't necessarily feel like qualified to, issue recommendations. And I would also add that like my book is pretty specific, like it's pretty specifically about like a certain time period.
Hmm.
And kind of like, and more about like the after effects of that
Right.
specific
Yeah.
training period.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
But
Sure.
yeah.
Yeah, I understand.
Mhm. Yeah, something else that I found really interesting about the book is that you bring in all these studies, and some are things that I would not have ever thought to be relevant. I mean, of course, you immediately know they're relevant, but it's like if I were writing a
Mhm.
book, I wouldn't have sought out, these really interesting studies about pain or
Mm,
let's see, I just jotted down. I was like, as I would go
there
through,
are
I'd see
so
like, here's
many.
another study you're bringing up. You have studies on like dancers being in the zone. You have a
Mhm.
study about how Hava Nagila, just dancing that brings people, it immediately elevates your mood. You have a study about kids wearing junk, what we call junk, wearing
Yeah.
not uniform, and how that affects their um, self-esteem, and then studies about mirrors, the presence of mirrors. Like as soon as I made a joke, like my first day I was staging a ballet and I had just read your book, and they were like, oh, we could be in the studio with or without mirrors. And I was like, well, it's the first day, we'll do no mirrors because I know this study
Good.
now that says that's
Amazing.
no, but I'm just curious how you decided that was something that you wanted to bring in, or like how you even started to research and how did you find those and then bring them into your work?
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm just a massive nerd, and my background is actually in science journalism. My first book was about totally different. It was about the science of dreaming. And I've done a lot of my freelance journalism has been in the like kind of more academic space. So it was just kind of like, that's just kind of where my rabbit holes go, is into like the scholarship and just kind of Googling around on like Google Scholar and various academic journals. But yeah, I mean, I thought the studies, it was so like, it's just amazing all the things that have been studied as well. Like that, someone actually, designed this experiment of like having, it's like college students take a class with or without like a ballet skirt, and then, fill out surveys about how their body.
So interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I really like the one about Hava Nagila, because they were talking too about like how we were talking in that section about how babies too, just like that natural motion makes them happy. And like my son is 9 months old, and just like sometimes I'll just dance to him, and it just like he moves around, and it is just something that's so natural, and you can see it just like bring this joy when he doesn't even know that what that means. It's not like he has any consciousness as to what's going on. So I really like that. But I do want to delve into, while we're talking about these specific things that the studies that you were highlighting, the one about pain. Let's talk about that one, because that was so fascinating. If you could give us like a little rundown for our listeners, I thought it was just really an interesting part of the book in particular.
Yeah. So there's this test to measure pain tolerance where you stick your hand in a bucket of ice water. You tell the experimenter both when you start to feel pain and then when it reaches a point that you want to withdraw your hand from the bucket. And, there's no incentive, other than, I guess, sort of, actually impressing the researcher or something.
Right.
And yeah, it found that dancers kept their hands in the bucket much longer. I think it was like almost twice as long as non-dancers. And then, at first the authors of the study thought, oh, like maybe dancers actually experience the pain differently. But then they found that actually the dancers were more in tune. They were so in tune with their bodies that they could experience the pain and register that it was pain earlier than the non-dancers, which just makes it even more, remarkable that they were tolerating it for so much longer.
Just like, I'll take it. Probably at some point thinking like, oh, this feels good. If my foot was swollen, or my hand was swollen, this would feel great, right?
Energetics are a sustainable Australian-made brand that specialize in creating world-class dancewear for the stars of tomorrow. Perform and feel your best at every stage of your dance journey in Energetics premium high-performance fabrics. See their entire range online at energetics.com. That's ENERGETIKS.com. And for all listeners, there's a 20% discount on all Energetics products using the code COD20 at the checkout, available until the end of September 2023.
After nearly a decade-long hiatus from live performance, Chris Masters Dance returns with Mausoleum at Brooklyn Academy of Music's Fishman Space, June 2nd to 4th. Reckoning with the dance field's history of systematic exploitation, Chris Masters Dance is building a mausoleum, a place to acknowledge and remember the past that has been laid to rest, making way for tomorrow that sets aside unsustainable forms of life and work. Don't miss Mausoleum at BAM this June 2nd through 4th. Tickets are available at bam.org/mausoleum or click the link in the show notes.
But then it's like you dive in, like that's one aspect of that whole section of the book, but then you explore the idea that like it can be almost like sort of dancers can almost fetishize pain. We do, and it's interesting. Like it becomes this thing where it's like, are we inclined to that? Like, do we like that? Or did dance teach us to like that? Like this sort of chicken or egg thing that happens in a few different cases in the book. It's like, oh, also when you talk about, I think you call it the doctrine of passivity. And like that is another really interesting thing to explore that you take on in the book. It's like, are we inclined just naturally as people to be passive, or does dance then amplify that, or did it not exist? Like all that sort of stuff that you're weaving in and out of the book. I think it's very interesting. Like when did you start to dive into that particular side of things? Like um chicken or egg, where are we naturally passive, or does dance like just at least amplify that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was just sort of thinking about my own childhood and kind of development. And I think like, I definitely as a kid fit that stereotype of like I was very quiet and shy, and it was very comforting to like be in a room where the rules were clear. And,
Mhm.
even if I couldn't always conform to them, like at least I kind of knew what they were. And of course you didn't have to say anything. And yeah, I mean, I definitely like heard that from a number of other people, read that in various books.
Mhm.
But yeah, I mean, I think the question of like whether I was drawn to ballet because of that, and then kind of created this feedback loop where ballet
Mhm.
encouraged and rewarded it. I don't know. I mean, what do you guys think? You're the professional dancers.
No.
No, it's just, yeah, it's always, I mean, it's a hard thing to unpack there, but I think it's certainly, I think in your book you really do a great job of kind of bringing up these contradictions. Like ballet is just full of
Hmm.
contradictions, and
Yeah.
there are questions you cannot answer, but I think you bring them up in a way that is important, and certainly like provoked thoughts that I had not really explored. And one thing that I want to
Hmm.
bring up, that I think you're the only person I've heard say this, because there has been a lot of, I feel like it happens every so often. Like now,
Hmm.
there have been a lot of articles about Balanchine and his behavior versus,
Hmm.
the art. I think we all agree we love the ballets, you know.
Hmm.
But I think at some point you're going through things that are certainly like definitely problematic. I think
Hmm.
certainly by our standards, to 2023 standards, but
Hmm.
even at the time, I think they probably gave people, pause for concern. But then you basically just say, you kind of think, well, like if all these women are they're choosing to, give their lives to him, and they're not,
Hmm.
mired in trauma, I guess, then you have to like let
Hmm.
them have their experience. We can't assign them their feelings. I feel
Yeah.
like I've never heard anyone say that. I thought that was
Hmm.
interesting.
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, I like, some of my teachers, like certainly continue to celebrate Balanchine and cherish their experiences with him. And it just wouldn't feel right at all for me as a, younger woman who grew up in a different time to just come in and say, you can't feel that way about your life. I think we have
Right.
to, both respect the women who worked with him and how they feel about their experiences while also, you know, um, thinking about how to pass on um, his ballets without necessarily, fetishizing everything he ever said and did.
Right. I mean, we had Jennifer Homans on,
Hmm.
and we were talking about her book, which I just loved because I felt like it was the
Hmm.
first time I had read the depiction of Balanchine as a man. It's
Hmm.
always, and it's certainly the way, like, I love Balanchine. I
Hmm.
went to SAB. I spent my life in a Balanchine
Yeah.
company, and
Yeah.
it kind of it makes you feel nice to have this like tingly idea that like
Hmm.
something that like bigger and better than yourself. But I also thought it was equally fascinating to just get a real inside view about like who he was as a person, because that is not
Hmm.
something we get to explore. But
Yeah.
I think we
Well, I remember. Oh, I just want to say, did you see the documentary in Balanchine's classroom?
yes, which there is
Oh,
a
it's
moment
really
I want
good.
to talk
Yeah.
about in there that you reference. But go ahead.
Okay.
We'll circle back.
Um, well, I remember actually seeing that movie was the first time I had ever seen footage of Balanchine. And it was somehow so like like I don't know, it was just such a like kind of moment of like I'd like grown up just like hearing, hearing and thinking so much about him that he had just
Mhm.
become like not a person, but just like an idea. And then yeah, there was just something very kind of, yeah,
Almost
it was
jarring.
like very humanizing and jarring to be like,
Yeah.
oh, yeah.
Yeah, I feel like
So,
our generation like knows him through the steps, right? And the ballets really is how I feel connected to it. So it is, interesting, like you're saying, to see that other side.
yeah. And that's funny. I haven't thought about that, but I had that same moment. Um, Granted, it was for something different. I think it was a documentary, and there was footage of Balanchine and Stravinsky. And I remember how jarring it was to hear him speak, because
Yeah.
up until that point, it's like Rebecca was saying, like I knew him through the steps, and it was very easy to divorce him from any sort of humanity. Just like
Yeah.
this godlike figure genius who,
Yeah.
who when you dance that way, like we all know how freeing that feels. It feels different, or I think to us it felt different from other ways of moving, like you do his ballets, or like you learn certain things about the technique and how you're meant to move bigger, or like this is supposed to be the musicality of things. But it was I remember being like, oh, he's just a human being, and his voice is like kind of funny, and he has
Yeah.
this little like facial tick, and wow, this giant is actually just still a person.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Yeah. I want to talk. Wait. Oh, sorry.
I know what you want to talk about. Yeah, yeah, you were
Sorry.
going to go there. Go.
Yeah. I don't want to forget. Because I do think it's interesting. Like, there are those things where you're like, that would not be okay today, and or you question like why people did accept things, and then it's because they felt like attached to something larger than themselves. But then when you're once removed, and so let's say we're having like a person staging a ballet, and it's like without the genius actually present in the room, and you're just doing the steps, but um that person, I don't know if Balanchine ever acted like that. Maybe he didn't, but there's a moment where someone's coaching in Balanchine's classroom, and I think we all kind of just went like, "Oh, this is not great for now." And it's someone coaching an ABT principal, and this principal who Rebecca and I both know, love, and adore, and is the sweetest person, is just like in tears. And we're like, well, maybe we could not be doing that today. I don't know if she
Yeah.
needed that one today. So I guess like
That's so
it's not a
interesting that you
question,
had,
but
because that's a moment that yeah, no, it's very interesting that you like had the same reaction as I did, because you're obviously, you know, familiar with the rehearsal norms of today. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think what I noticed was like, I think this kind of happens in the like next generation, right? Where like the person who could be flexible and could be maybe, I mean, take even the example of like my title, which, I know some people have had feelings about. But it's like maybe Balanchine said, don't think, to a dancer who was overthinking and needed to hear that. But then it
mhm.
gets passed down as this kind of doctrine and these like sacred words, and just becomes calcified into something harsher.
Mhm.
Yeah, I did want to talk about that because, there has been this conversation. The name of your book is Don't Think Dear. And then, there has been people who have brought up the fact that there is another, part of it that don't think dear, just do, right? To get out of your head. So was that like a conscious reason that you presented the title in this way? Give us a little bit of insight into your thought process behind that.
Yeah, well, I mean, I do discuss the just do part
Mhm.
in my final chapter. And I think part of that is kind of like tracks with the evolution of my thinking about that phrase, and also kind of ballet as a whole. Um, but yeah, I mean, don't think dear was something that was repeated to me and stuck with me. And I think it's also about like as I was just saying, like, it's not the title is not an accusation. It's about something that took on a different meaning when it was once removed from the person who had said it.
This is something that I feel like just generally nuance can be stripped from the conversation, but I think that you offer a very nuanced point of view, and it's hard because it gets very like camp, pro-balancing, camp, anti-balancing, or that sort of thing. But I think it's not that at all. I mean, even like Jennifer Homans' book, I thought was just so wonderful. It made me, it amplified my love for and connection to the ballets. But then, people got upset by certain stories that were told. And I don't know. I just think they're like the way you deal with it in the book, like exactly what you're talking about is the way that it was once removed, it took on a different meaning. It's no longer, the genius himself saying it to you, and you're connected to this not higher power, but you're like not balancing himself, but like that the art is a higher power. It's almost a religion. And then he's not there. It's someone else repeating it. It kind of strips away. And then you mentioned it in the last chapter, and you think about like what if he had said that to you, and you kind of like strip away the way that you can get in your own way and you get in your own head. I mean, because I certainly was that kind of dancer too. Maybe I needed him to just to say, don't think dear. But yeah, I think it's just so much more nuanced and complicated, and it's something that you cover in the book. It's like, and even just saying on loving and leaving ballet, it's like just those two words. It's like two things can be true. You can love something and leave it. Just because you left it doesn't mean it was this horrible thing. There are contradictions in it, but it's it's a nuanced portrait of the experience of an artist.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I feel like most people who have read the book have understood the nuance. I think that, like, the title is also a little bit intentionally, provocative. But yeah, I think one critic called my book like an unrequited love letter or something, which I kind of liked. But yeah.
I think, well, I mean, how many people feel that way? I'm sure, like, probably. I mean, principal ballerinas probably feel like their autobiographies would be an unrequited love letter to ballet. Well,
one thing I liked, which I mean, this is in the book, but like, there's a Susan Sontag essay where she says that like she's never met anyone who was hard on themselves as dancers, and talks about like Baryshnikov berating himself after a performance, and like, it's sad. Yeah, but I mean, I've also heard from a lot of people who like, pursued acting or academia or music to a pretty high degree as kids and teenagers, and ended up with like a similar relationship with their art.
Yeah. Michael and I always say this, that there's no better employee than a former dancer, because we will work so hard, harder than we need to. We don't realize that everyone around us is doing a quarter of what we feel the need to do.
Yeah.
So I do think,
No, I'm thinking about when you said in the pain study that there is no incentive. I'm like, we don't need incentive. Like, we are just like, we will be competitive for nothing. Like, I will like, you know what I mean? It's like there isn't another person in the study with you, but you're just like, I probably would want to impress that person.
Absolutely.
We would act like that. Yeah. We so cuckoo.
Yeah.
Let's talk about this larger conversation that's happening right now, because there have been lots of articles happening. Your book is a big part of this discourse. So I just wonder how that makes you feel. And did you expect that this book would kind of like stir up, be a part of this conversation that's kind of like stirring right now?
I mean, I didn't know what to expect. You never know if a book will just land or if it'll just get ignored.
Right.
I mean, I'm very happy that people seem to be reading it. I think it's really interesting that the podcast came out and Jennifer Homans' book came out all around the same time. I mean, maybe something's just been kind of brewing for a while. I mean, I remember when Me Too first hit, kind of wondering what was going to come out of the ballet world. But yeah, I mean, I think it makes sense within the larger cultural conversation we're having about, the art and the artist and, kind of how to think about powerful men.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think, also like if 10 years ago, Jennifer Holmes' last book, she predicted that ballet was dying. And I think we've seen that, actually like ballet is, I think, like kind of really popular right now and feels very like very much in the conversation in a way that I feel like it wasn't even really in my childhood. Yeah.
It was funny. I was talking to someone recently and we were talking about ballet and they're like, oh my gosh, I've seen all these articles. Ballet's so toxic. It's just so terrible. And I just wonder, like, if you've encountered anyone that's just kind of having that black and white perspective on this conversation and like what you might say to someone who's interpreting it that way.
Yeah. I mean, look, it's frustrating when, there have been a couple of articles that I felt like kind of picked out the most salacious bits of my book. And those are in there, they didn't, it's not like they were making stuff up, but that, you can take things out of context. And,
Right.
it happens. It's kind of, but you see how things get a little bit distorted and then you become a representative of something that I think, but the book is out there and
right.
I think that's
People can read it.
Yeah, that's what I said. I think
Yeah.
it was really, I think once you read the book, you see that it is not that, and that it is a very nuanced portrait of what we experience. Like, I mean, so much of what you bring up in the book is completely relatable, I think, to almost any dancer. Maybe not the most prized, the person that had the easiest path. But I think
who is that
still
even?
maybe.
I mean,
Yeah, I know. Maybe that doesn't exist. I mean, we bring up plenty of people like the way, like, I don't know, Margot Fontaine's experience or Misty Copeland's experience. People that we think of as like certainly
making it.
Yeah. As much as one can make it.
Right. Yeah.
They have, everyone has things that they deal with in this art form.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I think this came up in the chapter on like body image and body dysmorphia, but that the way you're perceived often it just doesn't necessarily have much to do with how you feel and experience yourself.
Well, and that was interesting in that body dysmorphia. You're talking about just like being in front of a mirror all the time. And I'm sure we can all relate as not being in front of a mirror anymore. That helps a lot. I think we still like see all those things when we are in front of a mirror, but we have the power to like take it away from us or like, just see myself like in the mirror when I go to the bathroom in the day. Like, that's it. I'm like, oh yeah, makeup smeared and it has been for hours. And that would never would have happened as a dancer. It's just like it's just some things like that are just always there for us. And then when they get taken away, you suddenly then have that perspective of how things are different. But while we're talking about this like discourse, I did want to bring up the New York Times article. Gia Corliss was talking about feminism and as it relates to this bigger conversation. She says, quote, "The feminist case for ballet is right there on stage. It's freedom, and his choreography Balanchine made space for women in particular and for each woman to be free." End quote. I've seen a lot of Balanchine dancers online sharing that. And so I'm just curious, like sharing that as they agree with that statement that Gia made. I just wonder your thoughts on that.
Well, I think that, I talk about in the book that, it can be just an incredible feeling to do ballet and do his choreography. In particular, I'm certainly not out to cancel Balanchine choreography. But I felt like it was a bit of a straw man argument where she brought in my book in particular because my book and my reporting are really about the training environment and the training culture. And particularly about, going back to the beginning of this conversation, it's about, for every woman who becomes a balancing dancer and gets to experience that freedom on stage, there are just dozens of girls who are never going to get that experience, but who are going through, kind of absorbing all of these lessons and are being, are being really impacted by that. So I think that, those experiences matter. That's sort of, yeah.
Right. I wanted to bring up, I'm just thinking about what we were talking about, just even on the quote, it's like how the quote, as it gets passed down, can mean different things or stray from the original point. Like I was thinking about when you talk about Balanchine liking Gloria Govern's dancing, and then it said, by the time we were SAB, she would not have been let in the door. And that makes me think again about like moving away from maybe what intention is. Like, yeah, what do you, I guess, I'm not sure what the question is in here, but,
I think it is, I think it's super relevant because the period that I'm focusing on is like the generation after Balanchine's death, which I think was a more rigid time. Like I remember even being kind of having this like cognitive dissonance as a kid when I would look at like old footage of City Ballet and see these dancers who we were supposed to be, like emulating, and they didn't look like us. Like they didn't look like the company at that time.
Right.
And that was kind of, confusing. I was like, why are we being told to, suffer to be even more extreme?
Yeah, it is like all those Dance in America videos that we grew up. I'm presuming you saw those too. The great PBS stuff with all those iconic dancers. But you're right, they did look different from what we were.
I just wanted to talk about like kind of this like generational conversation that we're having. So there's, Balanchine's time, then there's like the generation that we grew up in kind of working for his dancers. And then soon there's going to be a time where it's our generation leading the pack. And I know that Michael won't bring this up, but I'm going to bring it up for him. Just because it's I think a good example of something like this, like when Michael was just setting increases for Justin Peck at Golden State Ballet, one of the dancers left this beautiful put this beautiful post on Instagram after working with him, talking about like what a positive environment it was, how good it felt to be dancing like that. And I just think like, I wonder what we hope or what you hope in the next like 10 to 20 years that ballet can look like as it evolves with a new generation leading.
Oh, I mean, I think I feel pretty optimistic. I mean, I just think our generation is, maybe just a little more conscientious, aware. I think we've reflected on what we experienced and are able to recognize like what we don't want to pass on. I think there are these really positive changes with, more female directors and more female choreographers. And I mean, probably some, social media has pros and cons, but probably creates a bit more accountability. And I think just like, I don't know. I mean, again, like I want to hear what you guys think as people who are actively in the dance world.
Well, I guess I wanted to like, it makes me think though, because I do think that is true, and that like we can, like we always just say like don't pass the trauma on. That's like our
right.
Every time I go to a staging, my friends are just like, that's first and foremost.
First rule.
But then I'm like, but why? I mean, this is not a question we can even answer. But I'm like, why did that thought not occur to certain other people? Like, why do some people? I mean, do they think it's part of the process and that makes you better? Like for me, I'm always like, I want to, well, of course, I want everyone to be like mentally well. And, my job is also to make the best product, but they go hand in hand. And I don't want to keep anything that was harmful. And sometimes that might be, you can still be a taskmaster. You can still be hard on someone, but as long as that person later on is going to be like, you know what, that was good for me that person was hard on me. I don't know why people can't just be like, maybe that wasn't good.
Well, one thing that I was thinking of when I was reading your book is I remember being told at one point, like talking about an injury and saying, you know, I'm going to PT or whatever, and hearing like, well, we never had physical therapy. And I'm like, yeah, okay, but like, don't we want that now? Like, that's cool that we have it now, you know, like good improvement, you know, and that's just like, to me, like a very black and white situation. Like, obviously we want the dancers to be more taken care of, but I think that's prevalent in everything, everywhere, I suppose, you know, views like that.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like there's maybe a component of like kind of hazing mentality of like what our teachers have been through, and that they associated with, you know, rigor with some of these like toxic practices. But I also think, you know, maybe the culture has gotten a little bit kinder, you know, in all fields.
Yeah. Sometimes too, as a teacher, like I would find myself being, you know, like wanting to go into the studio in a different way than sometimes I saw, and then just totally losing control of the classroom, especially with younger kids. And I'm like, oh, is this why they were mean to us? You know, so then I get confused for a second. Where I'm like,
I know. No, it's hard. Yeah. It's hard. It's all about balance. But I think we're okay. That's good. We all feel optimistic and we all love ballet. I guess as a last question, Alice, are you writing anything now? Do you have a book that you are, you know, working towards?
Yeah. Well, actually, I'm writing a few little pieces about ballet, just some little journalism pieces. And then I am working, my first two books were both in like, each was in a different genre. The first was science journalism. This one is sort of narrative nonfiction, memoir-ish. And I won't say what it's about, but I'll say the third one hopefully will be in yet another genre.
Nice. You have a big smile on your face. You must be very excited about what you're working on. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for joining us today.
With you. Thank you so much.
Conversations on Dance is part of the ACAST Creator Network. For more information, visit conversationsondancepod.com.